Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You want to call the roll?
Mr. Barker? Here. Mr. Farley? Rooms? Here. Dr. Houghton? Mr. Ellis? Mr. Rich? He's here.
I was waiting because I probably,
Contemplating on leaving.
Mayor Goodwin?
Yeah.
All right.
So before the meeting, we'd say, Mr. Farley's on vacation. Dr. Houghton's in a municipal association training, and Eddie Collins said he has personal business he had to take care of. And ahead of time, this is gonna be your last official meeting, but you have to serve until after the elections are complete, so you're not off the hook yet.
Correct.
All right,
I'm in it for the long haul.
there you go. There you go. Hopefully we won't be hauling too long after today. All right, so first up on the work session, we're gonna talk about the DOT requirements.
So, I'm gonna stay here because these microphones transmit better for the stream, and that way I won't have to turn my back to you guys. So in 2020, the city sent to DOT a planned program for possible future expansion of paid parking on Folly Beach. It wasn't necessarily to identify any areas where we're going to immediately implement paid parking, but it was saying to the DOT, over time, if we ever expand our paid parking, we'd like it to be here, here, and here. The DOT reviewed that. They kicked it back to us in late 2022 with several conditions. And one of the conditions was that if you want any more paid parking and actually to operate the paid parking that we already have, we cannot grant anyone any special privileges for parking in the South Carolina Department of Transportation right-of-way. And what that translates into for residents is that the residential parking program, where we allow people to get decals that let them park on the road shoulders for free in the paid parking areas, can no longer be honored. We've asked for sort of a grace period to slowly implement that policy. So our plan is on January 1st to no longer honor residential decals in the road shoulder parking spaces. You will still be allowed to use them in the paid beach parking lots, because those aren't DOT right-of-way. But road shoulder paid parking, DOT says, no, you can't do that for residents. That's giving them a special privilege in the right-of-way. That privilege is codified in our Code of Ordinances in Chapter 72. So we do have an ordinance on the agenda tonight for first reading. So this can pass second reading before December. But starting January 1st, when you renew your parking decals, they'll only be good in the beach parking lots, not on the road shoulders. And related to that are our non-residential parking passes. We sell a limited number of those at a discount every year. Those allow non-residents to park at a reduced rate in the DOT right-of-way, primarily used as washout. Well, granting reduced rate parking to non-residents is giving someone special privileges in the right-of-way. So that program will come to an end also. So next year, no non-residential parking passes. Well, right now, we propose to just scrap them completely. If we keep them, they won't be good on the road shoulders, which is at the washout. They could still be good for the paid parking areas. So council, if you decide to keep the non-residential passes, they'd only be good in the beach access parking lots.
They're owned by the city.
That's what's going to be in ordinance 1923 on the agenda for later tonight.
would we still be able to, I guess because we sell them, like we say we have like the Wahiti, they buy passes for the washout right of ways, but they buy like a reduced rate or a group rate or something, that would still be okay.
I think as long as we sell them at full price and they're like,
I don't know if
Or
they
a
pay full
defined-
price or not, I
and
thought they
it-
paid some kind of, because they buy like 50 of them.
I think we're going to have to charge market rate. We can ask, but the big deal is that it's for a defined period.
Yeah.
The non-resident passes let people pay a price and they can park every day.
Right.
And so there's no way to say, well, we charge them full, otherwise you have to charge them for 365 days. So we'll ask that question if we can still do that for certain periods.
Or we might
at
can
full price.
say, for this period of time, these parking spaces from here to here
first ones out.
Yeah.
We'll ask them what,
Oh,
if any, accommodations we can make.
Do we have any numbers like with that, the non-resident paid parking pass? Do we have any numbers as far as how many people use them? How many do we sell each year? And do they get used in the beach accesses? Or is it just the washout?
We've asked the parking contractor to run the numbers for us that we can have them next month. Meeting. They have a more sophisticated tracking system. They didn't realize what we needed, so they weren't able to break it down by area, but they said the highest utilization rate since they took over has been 22 at once on the whole island. So since they took over earlier this year, the most number of residential parking passes that they scanned at the same time on the whole island was 22.
Non-residents.
Oh, sorry, I don't know, I have to ask, but they're gonna run some numbers for us. They can do a better count than our old parking contractors, but we don't have it tonight.
But the key is the non-residents will only be able to park in the access parking lots, which is not where most of them want to park. So it's not gonna do them a whole lot of good.
We still get paid.
If,
why I was-
if they want to buy
Those
them,
things work if you sell them for an amount of money and then they don't get you. It's like a gift certificate. If you sell them, they don't get used, you win.
yeah, if they want to buy them with the stipulation that,
Because there's a line every year, we sell out of them in an hour and a half.
oh,
If they're not being used.
yeah, but most of those guys with surfboards on top of cars waiting in line. All right,
I just have a quick question. On the 7220, I think it is, in the red here, it says parking decals are not entitled residents to free parking along right-of-ways under the jurisdiction of South Carolina Department of Transportation. Is that a SCDOT written policy, or is that just something
That is a
applied just to us?
condition given to the city by DOT is one of their 3 conditions of approval of our paid parking plan. No special privileges in the right of way. It's not codified into law. It's not part of a manual or a handbook from the DOT. That's just a condition they gave us for our paid
Because
parking.
another, like Surfside Beach, I don't know if they're right-of-ways owned by the state or not, but I know they charge, or they give residential preferential treatment. Do they plan on doing it across all towns, or do you think it's just something just for us on our conditions?
DOT's unique in South Carolina in that whatever the director says,
Okay.
is what's gonna happen.
But when they passed the bill that said DOT has to approve any paid parking on the barrier islands, the bill did not include a set of uniform standards.
Okay.
So the law is currently silent on what the objective criteria are. And so that's what we've got.
Thank you.
Next, I need to get my glasses.
Yeah,
All right, can't read.
I will say that Secretary Hall had backed off some of the parking restrictions, but that was one they stuck to.
Okay.
Talking, negotiation back and forth with them, so, you know, she gave up a couple but she stuck with that one.
Compromise.
All right, so next up is our short-term rental ordinance review. And just to make sure everyone understands, there's nothing on the agenda tonight, the regular meeting agenda tonight for vote. These aren't proposed ordinances. There's one, but generally speaking, these aren't proposed anything right now. Back in March, when we made our technical amendments to the ordinance, council asked us to solicit feedback from folks. What do you think about the ordinance? What's working for you? What's not working for you over the last 7 months or so, as we've worked to implement the ordinances. We've had questions come up, special situations. There are many different novel situations that come up all the time, and the language of the ordinance is relatively bare bones, and so it doesn't address everything. So we've just been gathering kind of the operational notes that we have, and the feedback from the public, and the feedback from council, the feedback from our attorney, how we've implemented this thing. And so this is a summary of the subject areas that have come up in relation to implementing the cap as passed. Presenting this review tonight. for city council or for city council candidates and for the general public. When the new council is seated in November, we're going to ask them to almost immediately convene for a series of work sessions, dates to be determined, so that we can work through these issues and, to the extent possible, get some of the gray areas no longer gray areas, so they can be codified and help us implement the ordinance to make some of these decisions that we put off in March when we said we were going to sit back and wait to see how it works and get feedback. So tonight, there's nothing on the agenda, nothing to vote. This is just kind of a summary of what we've encountered so far. And I'm going to go through them, and if anybody in the audience has a burning concern that's not covered by what the list I'm about to read, please email me tomorrow and say, hey, you forgot about me. My situation's not covered in any of that. Add it to the list. And same for mayor and council. If you've got questions or concerns that aren't covered in this list, let me know. After that list, I'm just going to very briefly study or touch base on one specific amendment that the mayor does plan to propose. This is language, draft language of an amendment that would allow some limited transfers, family transfers. That's not up for a vote. It's not the final language. It will be added to this list to be workshopped and decided after the election. And then I'm going to hit the new proposed waitlist procedure. Back in March, we had proposed a fairly robust kind of double-blind lottery waitlist. We took feedback, we looked at what other folks do. We had some really compelling testimony from the lady who runs the short-term rental program in Mount Pleasant. And we feel like a much simpler waitlist will serve the purpose of the waitlist it's supposed to serve. So I'll touch on that, but again, that's not for approval. It's purely an introductory proposal to start discussions in November or late November after the election. One important thing for everyone to plan to be here in December. Business license renewal season starts first or second week of March. Staff would really like some firm guidance for business license year 2024, which means a lot of these decisions are going to have to be made in December and January, so any ordinance changes can get done. What we're trying to do is not have any drastic changes to the ordinance overlap with business license season, because once we get geared up and going and done all the public education, it's hard to walk all that back in the middle of renewal season. So for good or bad, short-term rentals are going to be up for discussion later this year and early next year.
So just to reiterate what Mr. Pope's trying to say in a really nice way, whoever's sitting here November the 29th, plan on spending December and January in meetings more than once a month. We're gonna have workshops after workshop after workshop, doing whatever we gotta do to get ready before the next business license season goes out. So the city will be ready to go.
So I'm gonna run through these. I'm gonna maybe briefly explain, give some examples, but we're not really aiming for any debate on the merits tonight. It's just a list. If you've got a concern that you don't hear me address, email me. It's apope@follybeach.gov.
You're just reciting the list that we have in front of us?
Yeah, but I'm gonna elaborate on something.
Okay.
So we already made technical amendments back in March. Did not change the function of the cap, but we do have some functional areas that need to be addressed. One is, will we allow a grace period for licenses that did not make that 2022 renewal? So we had a situation in 2022 where the county renewal system went down for several months. The late notices went out kind of late. Do we want to make an allowance for those folks to get a license in 2023, but it will actually be 2024? This was proposed earlier this year as an administrative policy by resolution in July. That resolution did not get approved. Do we want to make an allowance for property transfer? We have a whole list of things to consider. What's the definition of a property transfer? The ordinance now says the license terminates upon property transfer or change of ownership. Is adding your spouse to change of ownership, which should add your license revoked. That's not clear. ordinance. And so we need to flesh out what really makes up a property transfer. And that goes back to the LLC policy that we discussed last month. Does the transfer of an LLC that controls the property count as a transfer of the property? Does a change in the membership of a family trust count as transfer of ownership of the property? Those are questions that the ordinance is silent on. And we are operating now under administrative policies. If you were here for the discussion last week, you can see how fraught that is. So we're just trying to nail down what exactly counts as property transfer under an ordinance. Will dwelling units in the commercial districts be exempted from the cap? That was a request that came in a lot when we asked for comment from the public. A lot of folks said, what about commercial areas? What about multifamily units? Those should be exempt from the cap because they're different from the single family districts. We have a handful of properties that were caught by the moratorium and the ordinance. They were permitted under construction before anything passed or was adopted. We proposed there was the administrative policy proposed in 2023 to allow that handful of properties to be licensed, and that was not approved. There's also the exemption for HOA properties too. We got a lot of feedback saying, I live in a building that has an HOA. We quote, govern ourselves. We'd like to make that decision for rentals for ourselves. That was a big feedback. We're currently operating under a policy, only an administrative policy, to create temporary licenses, kind of unofficial licenses, to allow folks to comply with the SC Vacation Rental Act. That state law requires people who buy property with rentals on the books to honor the rentals for 90 days post-purchase. Our ordinance prohibits those new owners from getting a license, so that creates kind of a catch-22 there. So right now we have a temporary policy in place to give those people a 90-day license and then pull it back. Allowing licenses to be issued to heirs or family members. There is a specific amendment to that I'll go over later. But the idea of passing licenses to family members for various reasons is definitely one of the major areas of feedback we've gotten from these stakeholders. How much damage or demolition triggers losing your license? Our system ties licenses to structures. If you have a license for your house and you tear it down and build a new house, does that count? Do you get to transfer your license? Right now, we have an administrative policy that if for purposeful demolition or any kind of damage, but specifically demolition, based on our substantial damage rules for flood, if the demolition is 50% or more of the value of the building, then we say you've completely demolished that building and your license is gone. So we got a lot of feedback is how much demo can I do to this house that I want to remodel before you tell me I've taken away the whole house and I can't get a new license. So right now that's policy. It's not addressed in the code. We need to define the threshold for loss of license. Like how far can you take a house down and still maintain the license for it? Allowing 4% owners to convert to ISTR licenses when needed. The ordinance now, after our technical amendment, says that the loss of 4% status triggers the loss of a license. There are situations, and it's kind of partially addressed in the amendment, but there are situations where to have a 4% license, relocate, have life circumstances change, and the property changes to 6%. Do we take away their license when the property changes? If they put it into a trust or LLC that loses the 4%, but it's the same people, do we take away their license or do we issue them? Right now, we have a very strict, it changes, it's gone. That's how we're operating right now. So we have septic pump out requirements. This was another one that we got a lot of feedback several years ago before the moratorium, before the referendum, before any of this. We adopted a requirement that rental properties pump out their septic tanks annually and provide proof. This was the first year we really held the line on that during the rental registration period. We made people provide proof. And so we got a lot of feedback that the one size fits all rule does not work for septic tanks and rental houses. So do we keep that or do we amend it? Clarifying the business license renewal deadline for STR licenses. So prior to this year, STR licenses were generally treated like other business licenses, as you could renew them late and pay a fee. You had a license for house painting and it was due on May 1st and you came in on May 30th, we'd say, well, you're 1 month late, that's 5% penalty, and we'll let you license. Because of the cap cut off, the cap which says your license has to be renewed by a certain date or you lose it, we held firm on that deadline. If you were 1 day late, 2 days late with your STR license, we said, I'm sorry, you can't renew it. You've got to get back in line. So do we need to line up our STR license, I'll call it a grace period, with all other business licenses? And how does that interact with the South Carolina Standardized Business Licensing Act, which specifies penalties and late periods? This was kind of technical. We have prohibition against advertising too many occupants, but not about advertising too many bedrooms. So we allow folks to have a maximum occupancy of 2 people per bedroom plus 2. So if you had a 3-bedroom house, that's 8 occupants. It's a violation of the code to advertise that house for having 12 occupants, but not 7 bedrooms. They're related, but not the same. So we need to change that violation or tweak that violation to tie it to the number of bedrooms, not the total number of occupants, even though one causes the other. It's just it's a technical wonky thing. We need to look at it. What do we do with valid licenses that covered multiple units prior to this vote? We have an administrative policy in place that's not explicitly addressed in the ordinance. Prior to September of 2022, it was still possible to have one license that covered multiple units. We'd been operating under a policy since 2018 that required individual licenses for individual units. We were taken to court over that policy, saying, hey, that's a policy. It's not an ordinance. Individual units don't require individual licenses. After the decision, we adopted it by ordinance in September of 2022. So prior to that, you could have theoretically legally had one license for multiple units in 2022. When 2023 rolled around, there was a cap. What do you do to the person who has one license covering 4 units? So our administrative policy said since that license was legally valid in 2022, we gave them multiple licenses for that one license. That's policy. It's not in the code. How do we treat 4% dwellings that have a 6% rating built into them? So if you have one building that has a duplex in it, multiple dwelling units, you'll have a split tax rate, 4 and 6% based on the dwelling units. That one's relatively more straightforward. They're separate dwelling units. The licenses are separate. It's possible in Charleston County to have a 4% dwelling with 1 bedroom taxed at 6%. If the owner wants to rent out that 1 bedroom, is it an ISTR or an OSTR? According to the county, that owner can rent out that 1 single bedroom every day of the year, still maintain 4% on the rest of the house. So under our ordinance, is that an ISTR or an OSTR? We have an administrative policy saying it's an OSTR because the overall structure maintained the 4% rate, but that's not clearly addressed in our ordinance, and we'd like to look at it. Clarifying ticketing procedures for rental violations. We wrote the rental ordinance with a goal of the whole designated agent and strike program with the goal of allowing property managers to represent properties when they get tickets for noise, trash, turtle lighting, those things. We've recently discovered through court processes that third parties can't always represent folks in a court of law. A property manager just can't show up to represent an owner or the renter because they're not an attorney. And the owner of the renter is not a business. So we have to figure out our ticketing procedures to make sure that we're getting these things done in a way that property managers can represent them in court, legally represent them in court. And I guess the last one we need to codify is long-term leaseholders. We have a handful of folks who had long-term leases. Some of them were corporate tenants, had long-term multi-year leases that were legally licensed when the ordinance passed. And we have an administrative policy to treat them as owners and allow them to keep renewing those licenses under the cap until the lease runs up. But that's not addressed in the ordinance. So our administrative policy needs to be codified or thrown out. You know, we need to make a decision on whether that sticks. So those are kind of the broad subject areas that we need to look at in the winter and get some answers on. If you have a short-term rental license question that's not covered by any of that, email me. Email me and we'll add it to the list. We can't necessarily address each and every single situation, but if 10 people have something that's not on this list, it's something we need to address. Please, apope@follybeach.gov. So moving on, we do have some specific language in one of these areas, and that's the transfer of licenses. And this is a proposal that would allow a new ISTR to be granted if the owner of a 4% property suffers a qualifying event. So if you have a 4% property, you own that property and die, or you have a illness that requires you to move and your property loses its 4% rating, and you want to transfer your property to your immediate family member, you could do that as long as they came within 90 days. So I know I just explained that terribly. Basically, this is an exemption that would allow 4% licenses or properties to go to a family member, and that family member get an ISTR if it was related to a qualifying event.
Yeah. So this is not new. This was questions that come from the study committee. It was in the original proposal, and there's still questions out there for residents. If you die, your heirs have 90 days to apply for ISTR if they need, and they'll know within 90 days whether they need or not to rent the place or not, I guarantee you. They probably know before you die if they're waiting on you. But,
Might take me 120 days, but
well, you're slow, but or if you have an event, the other question was, if I had an event and I need to rent my property because I'm going into an assisted living place or a nursing home to pay for my care, then that would be a qualifying event, one qualifying event. So that's kind of where this comes from.
So right now, that's the only specific language that's tied to any of these subject areas. Each and every one of these is going to get its moment in the sun during the work session. As soon as we know, we'll let you guys know when the first one is and what we're covering, and we'll all sit here together for a few months and work on it. Last thing is the waitlist procedure. Like I say, kind of 180 from what we originally proposed. We're now proposing just a very basic wait list. We'll create a form, a submittal form with some to be determined, but relatively basic property information, name, address, proof of ownership, something relatively simple. You'll submit it. It'll send you a receipt. Your submission was received on October 14th, 2023 at 10 a.m. It'll copy relevant folks here by email to create a written record and a written timestamp. You're on the wait list. We'll guard that wait list until licenses come available, and then we'll just go back to first come, first served. That's the proposal for now. We'll have a special work session dedicated to wait list procedures, and we'll go for it. I will say that based on the attrition rate this year, if this year's attrition rate holds true, we're looking minimum of 3, probably 4 or 5 years before there's a license available under the cap. As is. That's just it. We did not lose a lot of licenses this year. So that's it.
great.
That's it. I look forward to seeing everyone. See you later.
Aaron, we're gonna cover the timeline, the last page?
Sure, the proposed timeline is basically saying in November, we're gonna start the work sessions in November. We're gonna have one or more work sessions in December and January so that we can get these things for first and second
Can the
reading.
public join the work session?
Yep,
Thank you.
yep. So
You
that-
could, we're not taking comments,
Oh, no, I'm not commenting. I'm just asking.
So
but you can
I'm just
sit,
asking a
yeah.
question.
all work
And he
sessions,
answered.
No,
it,
no,
so
no,
thank
I'm
you.
just saying during the work session.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
they're all public, they're all open, and just a reminder, starting right now and 24 hours a day, comments at follybeach.gov. If you email that, it goes to me, several other people, and all of city council.
Thank you.
So we'll be receiving them.
Thank you.
Aaron,
You may have a scrivener, sir.
January, February next year, that'd be the second reading,
Yes,
Just what Billy said.
yeah.
so correction on that, instead of the,
Well-
We're aiming for second reading in February.
okay, so instead of the first reading.
That would be an ideal situation.
Okay.
that's it. See you at 7.